Hi, this is Marty Wilkinson with the PeaceGiver Project, and today I'm here with Katie Hansen. We're starting an interview series where Katie's going to be asking me questions. My background is I have been abusive in the past. I'm a recovering alcoholic, and you'll get to know more about my story as we go through. But Katie's going to be asking questions based on her story and her experience as a victim of domestic abuse, and we may ultimately change the verbiage, but for right now it makes sense because, you were victimized and I was abusive. I've gone through a lot of work, and we'll talk about some of the work that I did in the future, but it's all going to happen organically. And the whole idea behind doing this interview in this format is to give some real insight and answer some questions that a lot of people out there are not getting. They're not getting answers to, in part because there's nobody to answer them. There's nobody really to be candid. And my motivation for doing this is I want to shed light on this, I want to help people heal. And I want to give people a voice, and maybe more than anything, I want to give people hope that you can change. We want to eradicate, we want to get rid of abuse in all its forms in homes. We want to make it a safe place for kids to grow up, and we want to break the cycle because it is generational. For right now, we'll leave it at that, and I'll let Katie introduce herself and share a little bit about her.
So I'm Katie. I was in a domestically violent situation or marriage for a total of about 3 years. We were married, and then it continued for about 2 years after that, until our divorce was final and I had a protective order put in place. So that's where we're at.
All right. So, and that's obviously the Cliff's Notes version. So again, what we'll do is we'll have Katie ask a series of questions. Prior to the questions, give a little background as to why she asked the questions, the reason why we're so comfortable in doing it in this format. Fortunately, I don't know if it's fortunate or unfortunate, but I think in the case of giving people hope, the cycle of abuse is very predictable. And in many cases, so is getting help and getting better. It's predictable. It's a lot of work. It's way more work than people think, I guarantee, when they first start the journey. But again, a lot of it has to do with dealing with sensitive subject matter. If I'm being perfectly candid, this scares the hell out of me. We'll be talking about a lot of things that I don't like talking about. I don't want to talk about it, but. And I'm a pretty private person by nature. I don't certainly have not wanted to be the poster child of this particular subject anyways. If I was to pick one, this would not have been it. So we'll start out with Katie giving a little bit of background and then asking a question to that end. So,
you ready?
Yeah. As ready as I'm going to get.
Okay, so we're going to start with my first question. And background behind it, I was together with my ex-husband for 4 years before we got married, and everything was great in my eyes, other than there was some manipulation now looking back on it. But the night that we got married, something completely switched. And when I say the night, I mean that night. So we left our wedding, went back to a hotel, and things completely switched. And it got physical, and there was a lot of alcohol involved on his side, and a lot of things happened that ended up in him actually just passing out afterwards. A lot of verbal abuse and things that way. And I want to know, why would it switch as soon as marriage happens?
I did largely the same thing. I was married for a total of 5 years, was separated for 2.5 of those. As it turned out, I was the one that left. I was the one that filed. I was the one that initiated it because things got really bad. Both parties were abusive. However, specific to this question, I did that. a switch flipped with me, and the reason why is before I was able to be abusive to somebody, I had to somehow make it in my mind that they were less than human. I had to objectify them. And the reason why I did that is because I had low self-esteem. I had low self-worth, and in my mind, when my self-esteem is that, when someone's self-esteem is that fragile, I'll just speak for myself, you'll do damn near anything to feel better about yourself. And in order to think abusive thoughts, before it becomes an action, it's a thought, and then usually turns into words, and then actions. And substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or something else, is extremely prevalent, almost always present on both sides of abuse, because people are numbing out. That's a lot of hurt to deal with on both sides. It's a lot of shame, the shame and hurt. So with specific to the reason why a switch flipped on the wedding night is somehow I believe I felt that because I'd already objectified, that there was some sort of sense of ownership, like somehow it was okay. Clearly it's not okay. Clearly it's not okay. And we were both very much in the throes of alcoholism already. And it becomes a lot easier, at least it was for me, for it to go from a thought to verbal abuse, which sounds like it happened to you on your wedding night. I don't know if it happened exactly on the wedding night, but it was pretty close. And very close, like within maybe a day, maybe two, if it was not the same day. And then it quickly got physical with the introduction of alcohol. And then when, after that happened, we both started drinking quite a bit more to numb it out, I think. Probably, at least it was for me. I wanted to numb out the shame. I knew that I did something wrong. I knew that it wasn't okay. But I was exerting control because I felt like my life was so far out of control. I was exerting control in the most unhealthy ways. But because I was making everything about me, and I'd already objectified her, somehow her feelings were not as important as mine, which is not true. Somehow she didn't matter as much as what I wanted. And so that feeling of ownership was formalized, and for me, and that's why it happened in my case.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good.
Okay, so I've been crying after the first question. You ready for another one?
Sure. We're both going to be sobbing by the time this is over.
That's right. It's good. It's understanding and clarity, and that's what you need in a situation. So, okay. So the ownership thing makes total sense. So let's go into the control aspect of it. For me, I wasn't able to do a lot of things that I wanted to do. I wasn't allowed to go out with friends. I wasn't allowed to do a lot of things that I wanted to do because I don't know. So I want to know why there's that control factor. Why is it okay for them to do things that I'm not allowed to do?
Again, I'll just speak. I can't speak for your ex, but in my case, again, this process is predictable, and I did the same thing. The isolation part of it is for two reasons. One is I knew I knew that what I was doing was wrong. Keep in mind, I'd already objectified to the point to where, in order to abuse someone, there have been a lot of studies. Brene Brown, she's written about it quite extensively in several books. And that's what the Nazis did to the Jews. They called them subhuman, less than human. Mussolini called them cockroaches. And before you can abuse somebody like that, you have to objectify them. You have to make them somehow less than. And which is, that hurts on both ends. It hurts now. It didn't hurt me back then, but it hurt her, and I'm sure that hurt you, because especially when someone that, you know, when you enter into marriage, supposedly you're entering into a contract of trust. Like, that person is supposed to keep you safe and protect you, no matter what, above all, and they're not. And not only are they not, but knowing that in the back of their mind, you're less than human to them. You're less than they are. So that means, so with the isolation, I knew what I was doing was wrong, and I was deathly afraid of being exposed. Again, that's really common amongst abusive narcissists. It's so common because almost above all, we're concerned with what other people think of us, even more than with what we think of us, or what God thinks of us, or what our partner thinks of us. Because keep in mind, our partner, we've had to categorize before we could abuse them, before I could abuse. I won't say we, because I'm not going to speak for everybody. I'll say I had to consider her less than human, which is so ugly. This is the mother of my child that I did this to. That's horrible. It's not right. And I'm not saying that to attack anybody that's been abusive. Brief background. Part of my objective in this is to put myself under the microscope, because usually when someone approaches someone that's abusive, they're attacking them. You're a horrible person. You did something horrible. You're going to hell. There's no, and nobody wins that way. I think it's interesting how people who want to approach them and change, so many of them like good vibes only and plaster Gandhi quotes on social media, and it's like, well, shit, pardon me. Gandhi was a 130-pound dude that wore a diaper, but he was able to stop a civil war by fasting for 2 weeks. Peacefully. And how are we going to reach people who've been abusive if we keep attacking them? We can't. So you can attack me if you want to, and that's my objective here. I don't want to be attacked, but I am definitely putting myself under the microscope. So the isolation, I was deathly afraid of her talking to her friends and saying the horrible things that I'd done and exposing me for basically being a bad person. I knew in the back of my mind things that I was doing over time, done consistently, that makes you a bad person. Doing an isolated bad thing doesn't necessarily make you a bad person, but if you do it repeatedly over time consistently, that kind of defines you, and that actually does kind of make you a bad person. So that's why I would isolate, and then I would go and do things, and then there was a double standard. Keeping in mind, it was okay for me to go and do things, but because I had objectified and made, and had to make her less than human in my mind, I had to, I didn't want everybody knowing that. I didn't want everybody to know how horrible I was, because then I would have to face myself. If everybody knew how the horrible things that I was doing, then I would have to be accountable. And even if I wasn't accountable, I would definitely be attacked. And I was. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying it just was. I was attacked. But, I'd done bad things. That's, that's human nature, to attack when they see someone they love being hurt and abused and attacked. And I was afraid of that.
Okay, so going with that, so the manipulation factor of it is very strong, right? So I was very manipulated to make everything believe that it was my fault. Anything I did wasn't good enough. Nothing I did. So being able, when I went with family or whatever, I was manipulated enough to believe that I deserved everything I did. So I justified his actions for my family. So I want to understand the manipulation factor of it. Why is there such a manipulation, a control issue, when going even just with family, which was limited as it is, or why you would need to go with, and I couldn't just go by myself? Does that make
To
any
protect,
sense?
it makes perfect sense. It's to protect a fragile ego, because if my ex does not have any family, but if she had said the things that I was doing to her friends, then everyone would know how horrible I was being. I couldn't have that. Not only that, but if I'm protecting the fragile ego and not wanting to rock the boat, and wanting to squash her voice, and that's part of the control.
Mm-hmm.
Is I would have to make her think, and again, makes it sound even uglier, but it's pretty ugly. That's exactly what the Nazis did with the Jews. They made all the Germans think that they were less than human. They believed that. And Mussolini did it in Italy, and he called them cockroaches. And it still happens today in the Middle East, where they, these other people who are, according to their own religion, are still God's kids, but for the purposes of their self-interest, which is exactly what I was doing, and what probably a lot of other abusive people do too. Everything is about them. It's all about them. And so, so if you were with family, if I was in that situation, if you were with family and told them what I was doing, I would be afraid of being exposed. I would be afraid that you were going to tell them the horrible things that I was doing, which I knew were horrible. I knew they were wrong. But if I rock the boat and don't protect that, then everything's going to change. And it's not that I didn't love her. That's not it. I didn't love myself. And then over time, I would, maybe I didn't love her over time, which is on me. That's not on her. In my case, we were both very abusive. It was a back and forth, and it was both isolation. She didn't want me to be with my family either. She didn't want me to be around my own kids. And I didn't want her to be around her own kids. And we were both raging alcoholics and narcissists and super abusive. I mean, it was really just an atomic bomb waiting to go off, and it went off. And so it's really just about control and protecting a fragile ego. Because if your family knew, if I was in that situation and your family knew what I was doing, they would attack me.
Even if you knew that I was so manipulated to believe that it was my fault and I deserved those things.
Well, if everything is about me and you're less than human, it doesn't really matter now, does it?
It's true.
That's ugly. That's really ugly.
It is.
But
that's a very true point.
That's what we're dealing with. And again, that's why that's why again, that's part of the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing, is because it's not so much, people talk about childhood trauma, and I did have childhood trauma. I opened up in a video about childhood abuse. But, there comes a point in time where I have to be accountable. I can't put everything off on that. And I have to change the way I think, which is exactly what I had to do. And that's how people who have been abusive to get better. And it's a lot of work to stop objectifying people and thinking them in terms of less than human. Because once you get in the habit of that, once I got in the habit of that, I saw everybody as an object. Maybe notwithstanding my children, but that's, 4 people out of 8 billion. Yeah, and that's ugly. Especially, I can see how it would be ugly and hurtful on the receiving end. It's like, well, geez, all of that pain was to protect your fragile ego because you had bad self-esteem? Are you freaking kidding me? Like, all that hurt was just to protect that? For real? And that hurts. And that's the kind of stuff that I want to speak to, because when an abuser is in the middle of that, we don't think about those things. The only thing that we're focused on is protecting perceived reality, which isn't real, but it's what other people perceive as real. And then we go home and we drink ourselves into a stupor to numb out because we know what we're doing is horrible. We know there's a ton of shame behind it. The cruel irony is, while we're drunk, all those horrible thoughts, the filter is removed. So once we get drunk, we're home alone, then we start saying those horribly ugly things that we've been thinking throughout the day. And then things get escalated. And if, I don't know if you were abusive back or not. In my case, my ex was very abusive, so it wasn't just one side, it was 2 people doing that exact same thing. Numbing out, full of shame, and then finding ways to attack each other. I mean, that's really ugly.
My situation, I'm sure I said a lot of things that I shouldn't have said out of anger, but I was never abusive physically. I was a coward at that point because I was afraid of what would happen on the back end. So I was made to believe that everything I was doing was my fault. I deserved what I was receiving from him because I wasn't good enough, or I said the wrong things, or the kids did something wrong, so he would take it out on me. There were a few times where actually towards the end of everything that my kids tried to stand up and protect me from him, which then made me snap, because that's Mama Bear and you don't mess with Mama Bear. And that was actually the deciding factor in everything that had me leave, was my kids interfering. But my next question, and I don't know your situation, and I don't know if there was cheating or whatever else that went on in the situation, but for me, there was multiple, but I was made to believe that I wasn't good enough, so there needed to be something on the other side. However, it was never justified on his side or owned on his side, even though there was all the evidence in the world and the other lady and everything else. So I want to know why I was never good enough to be just me. Why did somebody else need to be brought in that was treated completely different than I was?
That actually happened on both sides of ours. I don't know that either of us had a physical affair. I mean, I started dating after I filed for divorce. Not until I didn't start dating until I filed for divorce. And my ex has been very vocal on social media about, he had all these affairs. I'm like, I'd left and filed. I'd left and filed. I don't know that you can really categorize that. But I think is just as hurtful on both sides. There was texting, inappropriate communication with the opposite sex, and that happened on both sides, and it was very graphic and it's ugly. And again, that's all about validation, because I felt so horrible about me, and I can't speak for her. Maybe that was her stuff too. I don't know. For me, it was about validation because I felt so horrible about the person that I was being. I was looking for validation from anywhere. And because I'd already objectified her, and I had, that which was necessary for the abuse to start, she got treated differently. And that's sad. I mean, again, she wasn't the mother of my child back then. Shortly, it was within a few months after my little guy was born, that we separated. She lived 600 miles away. And so it was just validation. And that's one of the hardest parts. My guess is that's probably one of the hardest parts about being on the receiving end of that, is you think it has to do with you, and you're led to believe you're led to believe that it's your fault. Well, you did this. You were not making me happy, whether it's you're not doing enough, you're not making me happy in the bedroom, you're not doing this, that. It was never about her. It was always about me and my low sense of self-worth. And maybe it was in her case too. I don't know. I can just speak for myself. But again, where accountability on my part comes in, it's like, geez, because of my fragile ego, I was willing to scar somebody. And it's just been recently, within the last few weeks, that I've realized how long that lasts. Because I believe that with both men and women, when they've been betrayed like that, it affects the way they trust anybody. Future relationships. And something that weighed heavy on my mind was, oh geez, so my actions, the lies in my character, my cracks in character, are going to affect the way she interacts with her kids, our kids. It's going to affect the way she interacts in other relationships, and she might meet the most amazing guy on the planet, and then that guy, who did not deserve it, has to deal with my garbage that I left behind and somehow put back to pieces. And he may give up. As amazing as he is, he may give up because she's not in a place to offer a healthy relationship to him. And he needs that. He deserves that, because he's ready for a healthy relationship and she's not. So it's that still weighs on me, and that's part of the reason why I'm busy making amends, because I want to give the people that I've hurt the opportunity to heal. And most people, my guess is that most of our viewers will never get the I'm sorry. They'll never get the I'm sorry. Right now, we're about out of time. We'll resume. we'll resume with our next episode. We'll pick right up where we left off. Again, you can look us up on the PeaceGiver, PeaceGiverProject.com. We're on Instagram at PeaceGiver Project. Same Facebook handle.